these next couple stories, we're going to show you how MAGA does have a free speech problem, despite what they claim or want to believe. This is what I posted the other day. The inevitable escalation in the fight against free speech. Now the right/MAGA embrace hate speech as a means for limiting the First Amendment. And I'm talking about Attorney General Pam Bondi. And I will acknowledge, of course, she put out a statement. Lots of people reacted. And then she came back and kind of had to correct herself because people were pushing back. She says, hate speech that crosses into the line into threats of violence is not protected by the First Amendment. It's a crime. For far too long, we've watched the radical left normalize threats, calls for assassinations, and cheer on political violence. That era is over, according to her. She goes on to say, under 18 U.S. Code 875, it's a federal crime to transmit, quote, any communication containing any threat to kidnap any person or any threat to injure the person or another. So she's listing some U.S. codes that I think they're going to try to use to go after so-called hate speech. Says, quote, you cannot call for someone's murder. You cannot swat a member of the Congress. You cannot dox a conservative family and think it will be brushed off as free speech. These acts are punishable crimes, and every single threat will be met with the full force of law. Free speech protects ideas, debate, even dissent, but it does not and will never protect violence. It is clear that violent rhetoric is designed to silence others from voicing conservative ideals. You see how she frames that? It's not just about silencing people of all opinions. It's about silencing conservative ideals. We will never be silenced, not for our families, not for our freedoms, and never for Charlie. His legacy will not be erased by fear or intimidation. Interestingly, she got community noted on Twitter, where readers have added context. The U.S. Constitution protects most violent speech. The Supreme Court ruled it legal to justify or celebrate violence or advocate or teach the duty, necessity, or propriety of violence, but not incitement to imminent violence, e.g. telling a mob with weapons to kill somebody. So actually, there is protected free speech even related to violence. Not that we need to support it, condone it, or anything like that. And she's getting ate up in the comments with people calling her back. People saying, stop using the word hate speech. There's no going back on what you've attempted to do. Your actions in the week of Charlie's death are disgusting, and Americans see you for exactly who you are. You cannot be real right now. And it's basically just the right embracing what they accuse the left of doing. Because, to be clear, the problem with so-called hate speech or hate crimes is that it creates a special class of crimes or of speech. There is no such thing as hate speech or hate crimes. There is violence, there's assault, and there's ugly speech. And as the famous Ron Paul said, you know, free speech isn't for talking about the weather, it's for talking about dangerous things, unpopular opinions. It doesn't mean you have to agree, but that's what free speech is about. So now, MAGA, not everybody, I want to make sure, because I know some people out there say, Derrick, you're generalizing all of us, we don't all support this. And that's true, not all of MAGA is supporting this, as you can see in the comments. But for sure, the most diehards, the Benny Johnsons, the influencers out there that are trying to continue to create division and conflict, as I was showing on last week's show, they are standing behind this. They're saying, go after them, and we're going to show you in just a moment how this is expanding. Now, Ali Zek, for those of you who follow her, know who she is, she tweeted this out. A lot of people out there the last few days have been celebrating kids being kicked out of universities and people being fired from their jobs due to their comments on Charlie Kirk. Yet they were the same ones crying about free speech being taken away when the left was in power a few years ago, trying to shut them down. Free speech doesn't mean only speech I agree with, and no, it doesn't mean as long as it doesn't offend my politics or religion. Anytime you're begging government, universities, or corporations to punish people for their words, you're not defending truth, you're defending control. And you might want to consider what happens when the power swings back the other way. And so this is, as somebody says, this is the eye for an eye. An eye for an eye makes the whole world blind, right? They did it first, so now we're going to do it. It's obviously a race to the bottom, and I think any intelligent person can see where this is headed, and it's not a good person. I tweeted this. In the last couple weeks, we've learned that Republicans under Trump are willing to support the following: bombings of international boats in international waters without congressional approval, which, by the way, happened again this week; canceling people for their ugly opinions and views; the federal government going after so-called hate speech; using the FCC to pressure TV networks to cancel Jimmy Kimmel; and the feds going after domestic extremists, as we're going to talk about in just a moment. Once again, we have evidence that the mainstream left and right are not so different. They are both willing to use the violence of government when it serves their goals. And worst of all, they convince their blind followers to abandon any semblance of principle in the name of supporting their corporate team. Party politics inevitably leads to a lack of principles. Reject this mindset and stand on principle. Choose what is right and what is moral over what the parties promote. And I think that's the big thing. This all comes back to party politics. People continue to support the party politics, continue to blindly support their quote-unquote side rather than standing on principle. And as I mentioned here, people supporting the feds going after domestic extremists. Well, as of when I'm recording this on Monday afternoon, Monday evening, we have this report. The White House says Trump could sign order designating Antifa a terrorist organization as soon as Monday. In fact, by the time you're hearing this, this might have already happened. Now, for those who don't know, Antifa stands for anti-fascist. And this, to me, is one of the biggest psyops of the last decade, that people could be tricked to thinking that being an anti-fascist is a bad thing. It makes you a terrorist. Now, that doesn't mean you have to be Antifa in the terms of being the left-wing radicals that hang out in Seattle and Portland and other left-wing cities that like to do black bloc. And for those who don't know, black bloc simply means dressing in all black. It's a tactic that's been around in the left since at least the 90s, early 90s, probably longer than that. And it's meant to not only provide a little bit of privacy and anonymity, but when you're in a big group of people all dressed in black, it creates the illusion of size and mass and power. This is what people call the black bloc. And that is where Antifa has sort of evolved out of. And so people will dress in black bandanas, black helmets, black shirts and clothes. They're also trying to protect their identities in case they want to go out there and fight the cops and things like that. And look, some of you might not like that. Personally, I think there's a time and a place to go fight the cops and fight the government. I think there will be, and there continues to be times for that. That doesn't mean I agree with every Antifa or black bloc action that has taken place. But out of that black bloc, which is, again, just a concept, it's not an organization, out of that has come Antifa, the anti-fascists. But Antifa is not an organization like the DNC or the RNC or the Christian church or something like that, where you sign up and you get a membership card and you go to meetings and you pay dues. It is an idea. And this is one of the things that I don't think that MAGA or the right or a lot of you conservatives can really understand. It is an idea. And so by trying to say Antifa is a terrorist group, not only does it completely miss and understand the idea of what this concept is, it also is setting the stage for the Donald Trump administration to really go after anybody. They could label anybody Antifa. They can say, well, you're Antifa, so now you're a domestic terrorist. And guys, we don't want to be in a world where we encourage the use of labels like domestic terrorism, domestic extremism. It is only going to go worse places. Eventually, the Democrats will get back in power, and they're going to say, well, MAGA is a domestic terrorist organization, and we're going to have MAGA and Antifa. And again, MAGA is an idea. It's not an organization. Anybody can claim that, oh, I'm part of the MAGA movement, right? So what do you want? Wearing a red hat that says Make America Great Again to become a terrorist, terrorist symbol? But Caroline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, she said, Antifa is going to be designated a domestic terrorist organization. Let's go ahead and roll the clip right here. Check this out.
Antifa is going to be designated a domestic terrorist organization. The president intends to sign that executive order very soon as it's drafted, as soon as today, later this afternoon. And this is something the president campaigned on, because we have seen a rise in violence perpetuated by Antifa radical people across this country who subscribe to this group. And unfortunately, it's gone widely uncovered by many in the legacy media. It also went completely ignored by the previous administration. Not anymore. Not only, as you mentioned, were the bullet casings subscribed with Antifa mottos, if you will, in the heinous assassination of Charlie, but there have also been more examples than I could read off for you here in this briefing room today of violence from Antifa. I will just read a few. In July 2025, several members of an Antifa cell ambushed and opened fire on officers at an ICE facility in Alvarado, Texas, shooting one officer in the neck. Also in July 2025, 3 Antifa members were charged with assaulting a police officer during a violent riot outside an ICE facility in Portland, which for weeks prior had been under siege from the local Antifa terror cell. In February 2024, a transgender Antifa terrorist detonated an explosive device outside of the office of the Republican Attorney General of Alabama. In July 2023, Antifa members linked to abortionist group Jane's Revenge firebombed pro-life facilities and vandalized churches. In January 2022, a suspected Antifa member was arrested for bringing a pipe bomb to a pro-Trump event. In January 2021, an Antifa supporter threatened to shoot police officers and Trump supporters outside of the Florida State Capitol building. Again, I could continue to list many more examples for those in the room who don't believe this is a serious threat to American safety and our national security, but this administration knows that it is. That's why the president will be signing this order. And we will also be, most importantly, looking at who is funding Antifa and who is funding these other violent left-wing groups that we've seen perpetuate so much crime and mayhem across our country.
All right, so there you hear it. And look, she listed off some crimes of people. Maybe those people called themselves Antifa, or they were dressed in black bloc again, or they had the anti-fascist symbol or something like that, or they were radical leftists, because I'm not going to deny that there are radical leftists who do believe in property damage and violence. I grew up activist-wise and around a lot of left-wing radicals who do believe that and who think that violence is justified, just like some on the right believe violence is justified in some cases. I'm not trying to deny that. But again, this is an idea, a concept, and by trying to say we're going to designate that as a terrorist organization, it opens up the door to labeling almost anybody as a terrorist. So here's a little bit of insight from CNN where they're actually correct here. The term Antifa, short for anti-fascist, is used to define a broad group of people whose political beliefs lean toward the left, often the far left, but do not conform with the Democratic Party platform. Unlike militant far-right groups like the Proud Boys and Oath Keepers, and again, those are their words, not mine, Antifa has never had a leader, nor is there a hierarchy or a command structure. While some local groups are well organized, Antifa's lack of a national structure would make it hard for the administration to go after leaders or funding sources. While it is illegal to provide material support to groups designated by the government as a foreign terrorist organization, there is not an analogous law for domestic groups. And Trump posted on social media last week, "I am pleased to inform our many USA patriots that I am designating Antifa, a sick, dangerous, radical left disaster, as a major terror organization." So there's even been some pushback by conservatives, though. Check this out. This is from the National Review, which is definitely a pro-Trump right-wing organization and outlet. From their editing team says, "We can smash Antifa without designating them." I'm not going to read the whole thing, but this will be in the show notes. It says, "We've been here before. Trump made a similar announcement in 2020 but never followed up. In one sense, the exercise may be pointless. Counterterrorism law only allows the designation of foreign terrorist organizations, and in the past, the Trump admin has branded Antifa a domestic terror outfit. Our domestic laws provide plenty of tools by which groups can be investigated and prosecuted for promoting any criminal activity. We already criminalize contributing money to financing acts of domestic terrorism. Arguing about designation does almost nothing. What matters is investigating the conduct of people and charging them with relevant crimes. Some may argue that designating Antifa is necessary because it has been regarded to this point as only a brand name adopted by individual criminals. It's true that experts mostly view the organization as non-hierarchical. It has some entrepreneurial leaders who drift from one autonomous cell to another. It wants to look like a paramilitary movement that clears out fascists, but the reality is more pathetic," in their words. But this is still not a significant bar to law enforcement, who are completely justified in going after even loose-knit groups to commit crimes. We've seen this before. What happens when there's an over-insistence by political leaders on supposed domestic political threats? You get cock-up investigations and confusing plots where it's unclear whether FBI agents and informers are investigating actual domestic terrorists or merely seducing and entrapping people into plans mostly hatched by agents and informers. Meanwhile, we should not be ceding more power to investigators to watch Americans without getting a warrant. I mean, they're making a great point for conservatives to consider. It would be better to simply act within the guidelines of our already ample federal law codes. Surveillance of American citizens for terror plots requires the FBI to show that they are being directed by foreigners and that they appear to be violating criminal statutes. Otherwise, the tools already in the hands of law enforcement to treat violent members of Antifa and their willing co-conspirators with seriousness they deserve. So they're basically saying, look, we've already got laws in the books, and not only that, by kind of creating this specter of domestic terrorism, domestic extremism, you're going to justify the FBI going after after people like we saw after 9/11. And most of the cases we've been told of catching terrorists or domestic extremists have been the FBI entrapping people. And I thought that Kash Patel, you know, that guy that said that Jeffrey Epstein didn't traffic anybody to anybody, I thought he wanted to go shut down the FBI and, you know, turn it into a museum and get rid of it. But instead now they want to go after people who label themselves Antifa. Now, some people are going to celebrate this. They're going to say, finally, Trump, this is what I voted for. Trump is going after the bad guys. I guarantee you this is going to backfire, and it's going to go some dangerous places if we allow this to happen, if we stand by. We've seen what happened after 9/11 when people were labeled terrorists and extremists. And I want to remind you, this will be in the show notes, about a report I did back in 2020 when Trump was saying similar things and a lot of people were buying into it. The danger of labeling your political enemies domestic terrorists. This is a video I did back in 2020. You can check that out in the show notes, because I think that's really, we're back there again. People are wanting to use these labels, and it's going to get very bad if we allow it to happen, guys. Don't fall into that trap. Yes, you can oppose some of the left-wing violence and say that that's not right, that's not correct, and yet still not fall into the trap of embracing this language of the war of terror. Remember that? The war of terror, the post-9/11 hysteria, where people were getting rounded up and kidnapped by the government just because they said that they were a terrorist, even if they never provided any evidence. That's where we are going, my friends. So I want to invite you guys to not buy into this. And if you see people pushing this rhetoric online, please, 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 for the love of freedom of speech and for everything that the United States allegedly stands for, please push back on it, guys. Don't buy into it. Don't participate in it. You're only going to be hurting yourself in the long term.
Since 2012, the Conscious Resistance Network has been an independent media organization focused on empowering individuals through education, philosophy, health, and community organizing. We work to create a world where corporate and state power do not rule over the lives of free human beings. Our motto is leading by example and helping others in their pursuit of freedom. Visit theconsciousresistance.com to find our articles, documentaries, interviews, podcasts, books, and more. Remember, you are powerful, you are beautiful, and you are free.